I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
I'm an old soul, got a funky sound. Gonna sing a song, turn the world around.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Vasquez here, coming to you live. Don't worry, we have Nietzsche supporting us from behind. He's obviously working at his desk. That was actually I don't think I ever told the story about this, but that was a painting done by a friend of ours at the request of my wife for my birthday last year. And it's a painting of Nietzsche. It's pretty cool, and it has some kind of secret details included. Yesterday, I posted a video on contracts, like legal contracts, and today I'm going to talk about the same thing again because I read a different contract this morning, and I'll tell you what my opinion of that contract was. So, like I said before, I'm not trying to sound like, Mr. Businessman or something like that, but over the last couple of years, I have gained a lot more experience than obviously anything I had before, and I'm pretty happy with that. So, if you have interest in, gaining some insights into business and, legal contracts and kind of some of the finances as well, if I learn something, then I'm happy to teach it. And if you know better, then good for you. And if you don't want to hear it, that's fine too. But for people who need or want to hear this, sorry about the background noise. For the people who need or want to hear this, I'm going to share what I'm learning, because these are things that I never knew and no one ever taught me. And, I had to learn kind of late. I don't really know I don't know if or how it would have changed my life to know this stuff earlier, but I know it now, and so here it is. I'm pretty happy with the course that I've had in my life, but now it's taken a different course. So these are some of the things that I'm learning. So let's talk about this contract that I read this morning. And, in business, anytime you're going to do something, you obviously have to have some type of business agreement with somebody. And that usually takes the form of a contract. And so when I talk about reading contracts, it's not like I'm signing all of them, I'm just looking at them. Some of them I sign, and some of them I think are just stupid. But that's part of the lesson that I'm learning, and that's part of the lesson that I want to share with you. And I said this before. I said this in a video that I did back in 2022. I said, just because you want to do business with someone, and just because, let's say they offer a contract and say, hey, sign here, doesn't mean you have to sign it, and doesn't mean that you should sign it. And in my experience, roughly 30% of the time, the contracts are how can we say this? So, let's see. So I have, I could explain this a million different ways. But, from a philosophical standpoint, especially from a Nietzschean standpoint, that's Nietzsche behind me. From a Nietzschean standpoint, you have Apollo and you have Dionysius, or Dionysus. And Apollo represents order and structure, and Dionysius represents kind of visceral vitality, so to speak. And you have to have both of those in your life. You need to have order and structure and intelligence and knowledge and restraint. That's the Apollo side. And then the Dionysian side is kind of visceral and raw and crude, and, he was the god of wine and parties and stuff like that. So I can explain this. I can explain almost everything in both personalities, so to speak. I can do, high-level presentations. But when I do casual videos, I try to keep them casual and kind of visceral, because I think that's a way of communicating things that we can all relate to, at least as easily, but more profoundly than simply keeping things intellectual. So like I want to describe this contract. I'll try to describe it from an Apollonian standpoint and also from a Dionysian standpoint. So hopefully, in my preface just now, I was about to get into reading this contract. Oh, so here's what I was saying a moment ago. When you do business, you have to eventually sign contracts with people because that's what business is, basically. You have your rights, they have their rights, you have your expectations, they have their expectations or limits, and you're going to exchange money for that. That's called business. So business always has a legal component and a financial component. But I'm going to argue in this conversation that it should and does also have an emotional component, and that's appropriate. So let's see. I did take a few notes. I'll read kind of the highlights of my notes. So we're going to talk about this contract that I looked at. Like I said, I'm not signing all these contracts. It's not like I'm doing business all over the world or something like that. But when I want to do something, and if I have to engage with other companies or other individuals, then we have to sign contracts. And that doesn't mean it's always an exchange of money. Sometimes, like the one that I'm about to talk about right now, is called a non-disclosure agreement. So that just means you're not going to share my secrets and I'm not going to share your secrets. So it doesn't mean that we've agreed to do business. It just means we've agreed to talk. And so this is, like I said, I know that I just did this video yesterday on legal contracts. This is a completely different contract that I just read this morning. So it is a different conversation. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to reply to these contracts. My third point I wrote, what's most important? Right. What's most important to kind of frame the reply to this? What's the most important consideration? Let's see. Later today, I'm going to send out a different video, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about points number 4 and points number 7 on my list. Are both about men's work that I've done. So I've mentioned, I think, in other videos that when I was in my early 20s, I was aware that I wanted a mentor, that I needed mentoring, not just one mentor, but theoretically more than one. And I was actively looking for a mentor in my life, or more than one mentor in my life. And at that time, as I mentioned before, I was living in Houston, Texas, and I couldn't find, it's just such a dead culture in Houston, Texas. I couldn't find anything. So that's a big part of the reason why I left Houston, Texas. And I'm glad that I did. So I left at the end of 93, the start of 94, and by 1995, I was in a men's group. And then in 1996, I moved from Portland to Seattle, and I was in other men's groups. A private men's group, and a public men's group, and then I was in a nonprofit men's group as well, so that's 3 men's groups. That was in 96, and then by 1999 I got into another men's group called the Mankind Project, and that was a totally different planet. That was a whole different reality, and one that was awesome. I don't know if it's still awesome or whatever, but for me at that time, I mean, everything was perfect. For me at that time, at that place, with those men, was absolutely perfect. And again, it was called the Mankind Project. I think their website is mankindproject.org. It used to be mkp.org, but I think they changed it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how that's relevant to business. And I'll talk about another book that I read, also related to work and business and things like that. So those are the topics for today. So I may have to... I'll reorder them right now. So I'm going to talk about this contract. That's number 1. I'm going to talk about whether or not or how to reply to these contracts. That's number 2. I'm going to talk about what's the most important priority and like what's the key factor or kind of qualifier for making these types of decisions. And for me, that answer is actually pretty clear. So I'm going to talk about that as point number 3. Point number 4, I think I'll say, is that book that I read. And then point number looks like I have men's work on here three times. So I'll talk about men's work, I'll talk about the book that I read, and then I'll talk about another aspect of men's work, which was also a book, and that'll be point number 6, and that's the end of what I'm going to talk about right now. So I'm going to talk about 6 points. Number 1, the contract. Number 2, to reply or not, or how to reply. Anytime we're asking a question, we have to have criteria for our answer. Not just send an answer. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but if you want to think about things in a structured way, and you know that I love structure, then that's the way that I think about things. I could reply to this viscerally, with some level of thought, or I could reply to it based on criteria, and that would help me shape my reply. So I'm going to tell you what my criteria is or are for this thing. So that was point number 3. And then after that, it could be point number 4 was men's work. Point number 5 was a book that I read, somewhat related to men's work. And number 6 is a men's work book. So it's kind of men's work and a book. And that's point number 6. And I'll show you how that plays into all of this. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. I'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. Or let me say as efficiently as possible. So again, I just read this contract this morning. And as I also said in today's video just a few moments ago, and I also said it back in 2022 in that video that I did on the beach when I was in Miami, you have to, in the business world, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not trying to be like Mr. Business Dude, guru or whatever, but I'm going to tell you a few things that I think are true. And if I think it's true, you can take it or leave it, but I'm still going to present it as if I think it's true. And what I think is true is that in the business world, even if you're working with so-called people who think they're part of your family, you've got to get used to saying this is bullshit, or you're ripping me off, or you're trying to rip me off, about at least 30% of the time. So that's about 1 out of 3 contracts. And you have to try to catch it before you sign it. I mentioned the other day that I signed a contract recently, and there was one phrase in there that I didn't like, and then it occurred to me like 3 days later, I was like, I don't know if I should have signed that or not. Which probably means I shouldn't have signed it. But here's a contract that I absolutely would never sign, just like the one yesterday. Here's a contract that I would never sign, and again, I'm using this as an example, that you have to get, in the business world or in the legal world or the financial world, you have to get used to saying no. And here's an example this morning of me saying no. I already did reply to this guy. And then I'll tell you what his reply was, and then we'll talk about whether you should reply or not. So in the first paragraph of this contract, this is a non-disclosure agreement. It says non-disclosure and non-circumvent agreement. Pretty much the same thing. It has the wrong date on it. I don't know why that is, but we could always amend that. Probably at the end of the contract it says effective date, but anyway. So again, this is a non-disclosure agreement. They have their name and address, and then there's the space for me to put my name and address. And then that's the first sentence, is their name and address, my name and address. We're about to sign this agreement. The second sentence of the contract says, a party hereunder who discloses its property information, proprietary information, to the other is hereafter called the information provider, obvious, somewhat obvious, and the party hereunder who receives the proprietary information of the other is hereinafter called information recipient. Okay, that's fine. I'm the provider, they're the recipient, they're the provider, I'm the recipient. That makes sense. I mean, that's just basic. They're just defining terms. But here's where they screwed up. They screwed up on the third sentence. And then, so they screwed up on the third sentence. I replied to the guy and I said, this is stupid. I'm not going to sign this thing. And then his reply to me was also a bit stupid. So we're about to talk about how this started out okay, identification, definitions, and then they screwed it up. So, and I'm going to show you how this plays into some things that I learned in men's groups and by doing men's work in just a moment, because it is actually very relevant. If I didn't have this guy's voice in my head from exactly 30 years ago. 30 years ago? Is that right? Yeah, I guess it is right. I was 24. So, when I was... 1995. Yeah, so in 1995, I was in a men's group in Portland, Oregon. And this is just a little bit of a tangent or foreshadowing, and maybe this is sufficient, but I'm going to bring this in right now. Because this is the voice that's in my head when I'm reading this contract. So in 1995 is when I joined my first men's group. And they were affiliated with another international organization called the Sterling Men's, Sterling Men's Organization or Group or Foundation or whatever. I don't know. Sterling Men's something. And their event was called the Sterling Men's Weekend. And I did that event in 1995, kind of under the wing of a guy, my friend Mark, who was kind of my mentor at the time. Good guy at that. Perfect that he entered my life at that time. It was absolutely perfect. And he's the one who got me into this group. I don't like the group, and I left the organization pretty quickly. But before I left, I was in a men's group around a little bit north of Portland, right across the border into Washington is where we would meet. Sorry, I'm not remembering the name of that city right now. But I'll type it out and put it in the video. It was just right across the border from between Oregon and Washington. So that we would have our meetings there. So anyway, one of the guys' name was Ron, and I don't recall exactly the context, but what I do remember, his way of advising me was to ask me a question. And the question that he asked me, it may have been with my father. I can't remember who else it could have been with. But he said, what are the terms of the relationship that you have with this man? And I remember I was 24 years old. So I didn't really have terms of relationship with anybody. You know, I had relationships, but sometimes those relationships worked, or maybe sometimes they didn't. But I didn't really know what it was like. I didn't know what it meant to have terms of a relationship. So that was his question to me. And it was kind of a wake-up call, obviously, because he was trying to... I was in Vancouver, Washington. I just looked it up on the map. So directly north of Portland, Oregon is Vancouver, Washington. It's right on the border. And that's where we would have our meetings. So anyway, I was apparently trying to figure out something with somebody. And I talked about the situation to Ron for a few moments. And then he said, well, what are the terms of the relationship? And of course, that totally blindsided me because I didn't know what that meant at a relatively young age. But what he was communicating to me, obviously, was that I have to define the terms of the relationship that I want to have. I'm going to say that one more time, and then I'm going to take it to the next level. So what he was communicating to me is that I, as a young man, as a person, as a human being, as an adult, as someone who's not a slave to my environment, I have to define the terms of the relationships that I'm going to have in my life. And so, again, that was exactly 30 years ago, but I carry that question with me. I carry that idea with me, even when I'm reading this contract now. And I didn't like Ron. Ron was okay, but we ended up getting into a big fight, and that's why I left the group, and then I left the organization. But regardless of that, he still taught me some things. And so when I read this contract, I'm also thinking to myself that what I am trying to create for me is not simply an agreement or a business relationship. I'm trying to create the life that I want. And the life that I want doesn't include working with anybody who I don't want to work with. Or being friends with somebody I don't want to be friends with. Or submitting to someone else's terms if I don't agree with that, you know? So, like I said, by the time I got to the third sentence, we were okay. Remember, first one is just identity. The second one is definitions. Third sentence, under this agreement, this other party, so let's say them, the other business, under this agreement, we are the information provider. Well, this is supposed to be a mutual non-disclosure agreement, which means I can talk to them and they're not going to steal my secrets. They can talk to me and I'm not going to steal their secrets, like in whatever, ideas or production or anything else. But you'll notice that the second sentence defined information provider and then information recipient. And then in the third sentence, they say, no, we're the provider, you're the recipient. So basically, this non-disclosure agreement only protects them. Furthermore, they have reviewed this probably at the ownership, possibly at the ownership level, certainly at their in-house level, and probably at like the vice president level. So this is a higher end administrative document. This is an important document for the organization. It represents one of the first contracts they would have with any client whatsoever. So whether they did it or not, or whether they respect it or not, they should have given this document a lot of priority, because this document is the first pass or fail of any relationship that they're going to have. So again, they may have screwed it up or they may have done it correctly, but I have to believe that this represents the spirit of that organization. They should have, the way that it should have gone is they should have drafted it, they should have sent it to an attorney who then made it more legal and tightened it up, and then they should have reviewed it, and then they've had experience using this document for a couple of years. So I have to believe that this document represents the spirit of that organization. And again, this is supposed to be a mutual non-disclosure agreement, but they've defined that it only works for them. Which means that if I sign this and then I begin to engage with them in terms of their secrets and my secrets, I'm going to get screwed. Because this document only protects them. So, that was a long introduction to get around to that point. So would you sign this document or not? Under this agreement, they are the provider, which means that the rest of this document, which is like 6 or 7 pages, the rest of this document only protects them. And it should be a mutual non-disclosure, mutual protection document. Question number 1, do you think I'm going to sign this? The answer is hell no. Number 2, what's the implication of this document? The implication of this document is they are either really sloppy or they're only looking out for themselves. Okay, so that's my interpretation. So how do I interpret that information based on my own standards? My own standards include the idea that I don't work with overly aggressive people, and I don't work with people who are going to take advantage of me. Just like that contract yesterday, that was a contract that I was trying to sign with a law firm, and in the introductory letter of the contract, the guy says, if you want to have this reviewed by another attorney, go ahead. I realize I can do that. I don't really need for them to tell me that. But I'm not going to start paying for service where the presumption already is that I'm going to have their work reviewed by another attorney. I'm not going to pay to have the work done twice. And I'm not going to pay to have someone else looking over my shoulder and looking over their shoulder to make sure they're not ripping me off, because they're kind of implying that they're not trustworthy. And I'll give you an example of a contrast. For the last 3 years, I've had a wonderful attorney. I've had a wonderful attorney for the past 3 years. And let me show you the contrast. Working with him, when I signed on with him, he says, and the same thing with another group that I just signed with, he says, I'm responsible for everything and I'm going to take care of your interests. He said, you can rely on me 100%. I'll be at the meetings. I'll be on the phone calls. I'll take notes. I'll give you my best interpretation. But he says, I'm here to look out for your interests and no one else's. He says, and I'll make that clear to anybody who needs to hear it. That's how we were able to advance. Look at this contract. The third line of the contract says, we're looking out for our own interests and none of this protection applies to you. Well, you think I'm going to waste my time reading a 6-page contract that's already screwed me out of my... I'm trying to sign this for mutual protection. I'm not trying to screw them over. I don't want them to screw me over. That should be the intention of this contract. It's 6 pages. You think I'm going to waste my time reading a contract which they've already said doesn't even protect me? Hell no. So I did reply to this guy. So now we're on part 2. Should you reply, or how should you reply? This doesn't even warrant a reply. They've already made clear what their intention is, and they're trying to screw me. They're trying to screw all of their clients. So let me just say this my way. Remember I said I could do Apollo or I could do Dionysius? I'm about to do Dionysius. Imagine how many desperate or dumb clients have signed this document without fully realizing they've already given up their own rights, which was the whole purpose of signing this document. So, like I said, I didn't even need to reply to this guy, but I did reply. I said, this is a joke. I said, the way you've defined the contract, it doesn't even protect me. Why would I waste my time signing a document that's going to protect your company? I'm not in business to help your company. I'm in business to help my company and me. Why would I sign a contract that only protects you? This is stupid. So that was my reply. His reply, which I read while we were out and about this morning, his reply to me was, he said, well, you can write your own contract and send it to us, and then we'll take a look at it. Maybe we'll get, and he didn't say maybe, but he said, well, you can write your own contract if you want. No, it's already done. So we're done. That's it. I already deleted his emails. I'll block his email address or whatever. I don't care. So his reply to me was remarkably indifferent, considering that we're trying to start a business relationship. He's like, write your own contract. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to waste my time writing my own contract. One of us has to start the conversation with a mutual non-disclosure. I gave you a chance to do that, and you showed me that you're only interested in protecting yourself. I'm done. I'm not going to start a business relationship for years based on an attitude of you only looking out for you. I'm in this for win-win. I'm going to pay you money. You're going to provide me service. I'm not going to work with anybody who's trying to screw me over for only their benefit. So that takes us to point number 3. Like I said, I did send a 1-sentence reply. I said, the contract only protects you. It doesn't protect me. I'm not going to sign it. That's fine. But point number 3, so now remember I said, you can make decisions intelligently. You can make them viscerally or emotionally. But you can also make decisions based on criteria. So now I'm about to tell you what I think is the most important criteria for running a business. I think that's pretty much true. I mean, obviously, any business has to provide a service or a product or what, and you want that to be of quality and integrity. So I'm not really talking about that aspect of it. But a very important aspect, so let's say you've got 2 criteria. One of your criteria is to do good work. And here I'm about to tell you what I think is a reasonable other criteria. And then this kind of gets into psychology and the men's work that I've done before. So remember what I said earlier. You're in this for you, but not simply money and not simply activity. At least the way that I look at it. I'm in this for the quality of my life. I want to do good work. I want to work with good people. I want to produce a product or service that I think is valuable to the world, but I'm not here to be a martyr to the system or sacrifice my own energy or whatever. So, what you'll notice in a lot of the business gurus talk about this, and I actually learned this from a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. So, in Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the real or imaginary conversations that's presented in that book is when the author says, he's talking about a conversation he had with his rich dad, and he's debating on whether or not he should buy an apartment complex. And when he's debating whether or not to buy that apartment complex, his mentor or his rich dad says to him, only buy buildings, which is to say, only engage in business that you really love doing. He says, if you don't love it, you won't take care of it. And that's the approach that I'm using with this business and these decisions that I have to take. I want to work with people who are at least competent, if not actually motivating. So I'm working with a guy right now, and I told him today, I said, you are Johnny on the spot. I send him an email, he sends me a reply. I send him a question, he gives me an answer. If he doesn't have the answer, he looks it up and he gets back to me 2 hours later. He's Johnny on the spot. So he's competent at his job. I'm working with another group of guys who are competent to the point of actually being inspiring. I mean, they're damn good. If I could have my entire team at that level, that'd be awesome. So, again, if you look at a lot of business gurus, and if you look at certain books, like there was one subtitled "The Power of," something like the power of full engagement. That was it. Power of Full Engagement. I read that many years ago. Another book that I mentioned, which I said I would talk about this as point number 5 or 6, but I'll mention it right now because it applies exactly to what I'm talking about. It was a book titled "Creating the Work You Love" by Rick Jarrow. And it's a little bit new agey and it's a little bit woo-woo, but it also underscores what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to communicate. And that is, I'm trying to create a life that I enjoy and work that I enjoy and work that I can be proud of. So in order to do that, again, going back to what a lot of gurus talk about and what's talked about in Power of Full Engagement, they say you have to protect your energy almost more than anything else. It's not time management, it's energy management. So looking at this contract where they're only looking out for their own interests, to me that's bullshit. I mean, that's not even getting us off on the right foot. They should be protecting their own interests, that's fine, but they shouldn't be setting me up for me to lose in the first contract that I signed with them. They've already played their hand. They've already played their cards. They've already shown, hey, we're looking out for ourselves and screw you. So that doesn't work. So point number 3, the most important or a very important step is you have to conserve energy and not waste time with people who aren't on your side. That's part of, let's say, I'll call it point number 4 since we're on number 4. That's part of Creating the Work You Love. That was the name of a book that I read. It's a wonderful book by Rick Jarrow. That takes us, or we can connect that with men's work, which I told you I had learned this, we'll call this point number 5. This is point number 5 from that guy Ron, who I knew back in Vancouver, Washington, who, again, I think I was having some issue with my father, and I told Ron about it, and then Ron's reply to me was, what are the terms of the relationship? Well, that's a impressively complex question, because that requires me to define the terms of my own life that I then carry into whatever relationship. So that was an important idea, and you can see me bringing that into this analysis of this legal contract. Do I want to work with an organization that only looks out for their own interests? Hell no. Like, I'm already done. I'm already out the door. So thank you, Ron, for teaching me that. And then the last point that I want to make, and this is a good point. So I've mentioned this book before called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, written by Douglas Moore and Richard Gillette, as I recall. That book was written like 30 years ago, but it's a very standard classic book, and it's a very short book. It's a really small book. Anybody could probably read that in a weekend, unless they're like me and they read really slowly. So anyway, it's a small book. King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And what they teach in that book is a model of, I guess, healthy masculinity. But part of the model is designed around a triangle image. And what they call the 4 quarters, I believe. And one of those quarters is what's called the king, or the boss, you could say in this context of business. You could say it's the king or the boss or the czar or whatever. So let's assume correctly that I'm the boss of my life and I'm the boss of my work and I'm the boss of my business. Well, if you look at it from a triangular standpoint, the highest level of being a good boss is a quantum leap above, I'm just kind of making up that terminology, but it's a quantum leap above being a bad boss. So this isn't a line, it's not linear, it's a triangle. And the goal is to be a good king or a good boss or a good president of your organization or a good leader or whatever. Again, a quantum leap above the bottom rung, which is a dysfunctional king. And the polarity of a dysfunctional king is either a tyrant or a weakling. So you, in their language, in their imagery, you want to be a good king at the top of the pyramid. You don't want to be a bad king at the bottom of the pyramid along a linear polarity of either being a tyrant or a weakling, and a lot of times vacillating between being a tyrant and a weakling. You'll notice that a lot of people who are weak or afraid of appearing weak will vacillate from that weakness to being overly dominant and overpowering to the point of being violent. So those are the three, in this case, three corners of the triangle. You want to be a good boss, a good king, a good leader. You don't want to be on the bottom rung, which is vacillating between this polarity of being a weak king, a weakling, or a tyrant. Also sometimes called an armchair tyrant, because it implies some level of impulsivity and immaturity. So, sometimes we could think of being a tyrant as being overly strong or overly powerful or overly domineering, but the need to overdo anything comes from a sense of weakness or immaturity. So that's why the tyrant is sometimes called an armchair tyrant, to communicate that this is underdeveloped. It's underdeveloped fake power. It's not legitimate power. There's something underdeveloped or something immature about it. So, the goal is to be, as I already said now at least twice, the goal is to be a good king, a good boss, a good leader, a good president. Either of these polarities below, either being too weak and too soft or being too hard, those have consequences. And I have to decide where and when I'm willing to pay the consequences for my positions. Ideally, well, not even ideally, practically, if I'm a good king, I'm going to have to make tough decisions, and those decisions are going to come with consequences at times. Certainly, the dysfunctional polarity of being either weak or tyrant, those obviously have consequences. And so we have to consider the consequences of each one of the corners of this particular triangle or this particular pyramid, so to speak. So when I'm looking at this contract, or just like when I looked at the one yesterday, when I make decisions, I have to be willing to accept the consequences of those decisions. If I'm too weak, for the advantage of being able to move forward, I'm also putting myself at risk for having these people steal my ideas or rip me off financially. So the benefit is I get to move forward with the contract. But the reality is, if I'm compromising myself from the start, then it's a bullshit contract, and I'm putting myself in a bullshit situation. And they're going to end up ripping me off at some point, because the contract was written by them, for them, to protect them. And in this case, this contract was a total ripoff. There's no way I'd sign it. I'm not going to even talk to these guys. They sent me another contract, and I'm not even going to read it. I don't care. I don't need a repair. I don't need a fix. I don't need an explanation. They already played their hand. I'm done. The consequence that I have to be willing to accept is that I could be losing out on a great group of people to work with. Maybe they're a great group of people and they just sent me a bad contract and it was an accident. I could believe that. You could believe that. I'm not going to believe it. I'm done. So, part of getting older and having experience with people and learning through painful exchanges is I have to learn to read people the first time and call it. And so, in my opinion, they played their hands, and I'm done. The other dysfunctional end of that polarity is to be overly domineering. Again, I'm going back to the tyrant, and be overly picky and things like that. In that case, the business isn't going to move forward either, because I'll be too much of a perfectionist or too demanding, and then that comes with its consequences as well. On the one hand, I could say, well, I'm fighting for high standards, but if I'm being impractical about it, then I'm going to be screwed in the things that I try to do with other people. So that's the consequence there. Am I willing to screw myself out of possibilities for the sake of maintaining high standards and defending my own interests? You're damn right I am. Yeah, I am. I am willing to pay that price. I'm not going to sacrifice the quality of my work. I'm not going to work with people who do bad work. I'm not going to work with people who are so suspicious of their own work that they tell me to hire another attorney to review their work, like that contract yesterday. I am not playing any of those games, I can tell you that. So, will I potentially miss out on relationships that might have been salvageable, or that might have worked, or that we could fix? Yeah, I'm going to miss out on that. And I'm happy to miss out on that. I don't have time to fix another organization. I don't have time to teach them how to do better work. I don't have time to teach them how to write a fair contract. I'm done. They've already shown how they want to do this. I'm not participating. I'm out. So that's it. Those are my lessons from this morning. Again, like, I didn't have any intention of doing this video or having these replies or responses necessarily, but it's just what happened. I mean, I got up this morning, I looked at 3 emails. This was one of my emails. I got to the 3rd line of this contract, and I was like, this is supposed to be mutual protection, mutual non-disclosure, and you've written this contract to only protect yourselves? You think I'm even going to waste my time reading 6 pages of that? Hell no. So that was it. That was the non-disclosure agreement, number 1. Am I signing it? Hell no. Should I waste my time replying? I sent him one reply. I said, this is just unreasonable. This contract is written only for you. It should be mutual. It doesn't work for me. You're only looking out. I didn't go this far, but they're only looking out for their own interests. I'm out. Number 3, what's the most important criteria? Do good work and conserve your energy. If you don't do good work, there's no point in being in business. If you don't conserve your energy, you're not going to be in business because you're going to burn out. Do good work, conserve your energy. Number 4, create a life that you love. That was the book that I read by Rick Jarrow. Number 5 was men's work with my friend, mentor at the time, a guy named Ron. He's the one who kind of put that idea in my mind about I have to be the one to select my own criteria and be willing to accept the consequences of that. If I set a firm boundary with a business partner or my father or a friend of mine, I have to be willing to take the consequences of that. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. And then that takes us to point number 5. I talked about that book by Moore and Gillette called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. They use a pyramidal or triangle image. And in this case, we're talking about leadership, president, boss, whatever you want to call it. Leadership, let's call it. You want to be a good leader. You don't want to be a weakling. You don't want to be a tyrant. If you're a weakling, people are going to take advantage of you. They're going to take advantage of me. If I'm too much of a tyrant, I'm too strict, too much of a perfectionist, then I'm not going to advance because I have to work with human beings, and some of them are going to screw up, and then sometimes they'll fix their screw up. But in that polarity, I would prefer to be a little hard and a little more strict than might be comfortable, because I want this thing to be as close to perfect as possible. And that's the standard that I'm going to maintain. The price of that is it's going to take more work on my end because I have to search more diligently to find people I can work with. And I am willing to do that. I am willing to delay progress in order to work with people who I want to work with, who do excellent work to the point of actually inspiring me to do my own work even better. And that would be a hell of an achievement. But that would be worth fighting for. So that's the route that I'm taking, and that's the price I'm willing to pay, and that's the discipline I'm willing to implement in order to get there. So those are my insights for this morning. Hope you're all doing well. I'll get this video on the website as soon as I can. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
I'm an old soul, gotta focus on Gonna sing a song, turn the world around. I whoop that ass, you know I got the moves. Spank that ass, I'm gonna make you move. I ain't no player, I'm just here to shake